Hey friends, welcome back to the Dwelling Place podcast. We are so glad that you are joining us today, and we hope you're encouraged and inspired as you listen to this week's message.
I don't know if you've ever experienced sleepwalking or lived with someone who does, but it's one of those things that's like equal parts hilarious and mildly terrifying. And I heard this story once about a guy who fully believed he was awake and absolutely was not. And the story goes that it's the middle of the night. He wakes up. Well, he doesn't wake up. He gets up. Middle of the night, he gets up. He walks to his laundry, grabs a basket, and starts to unload all the clothes out of the dryer. He then proceeds to take that basket of clothes to the kitchen bench and sort all of those clothes into wonderfully neat piles. You know, a stack of pants here, a stack of shirts there. And then his wife wakes up to the sounds of cupboards opening and closing at 3 a.m. and thinking, what is going on? She wanders out into the kitchen to find her husband putting a neatly folded pile of socks into the cutlery drawer. She takes a moment to try and gather her thoughts and work out what is going on here. And she asks the obvious question in the moment, "What are you doing?" And without missing a beat, he shrugs and says, "I'm folding the clouds." Not the laundry, the clouds. And the best part, my favorite part of the story, is that when she tried to convince him that he should leave the folding the clouds till tomorrow and come back to bed, he began to argue with her about why this absolutely had to be done right now. "You don't understand," he said. "If I don't finish this now, tomorrow is going to be chaos." I don't know about you, but finding socks in my cutlery drawer sounds a little chaotic. And that says someone who has 2 toddlers in my house. I find things everywhere, but socks in my cutlery drawer, that would be a new one. But this is the thing, this guy, eyes open, body moving, fully confident, but completely asleep. Now, this is kind of a funny story when it happens in the middle of the night, when it's talking about laundry. But it's a little more sobering when we realize that this can also happen in our souls. Because you can be active, but unaware. You can be present, but not paying attention. And you can be close to Jesus, but still asleep to what he's doing. We might not like to admit it, but I think we've all known times, and we've all known what it's like to walk through life spiritually drowsy. I think we've all had times where we've gone through the motions but missed the moment. I think we all, if we're honest, I think we've all experienced what it's like to fold the clouds. And so this morning I want to speak a message that we've entitled, "Wake Up, Sleeper." Because I believe this morning that Good Friday is like a spiritual alarm clock, a moment to stop, to look again, and to wake up to the reality of what Jesus did and why it still changes everything. Nudge the person next to you this morning and just say, "Wake up. Wake up, sleeper." This morning, I want to take a look at a number of moments that we see in the lead up to the cross and see how Jesus' disciples, these people that were closest to him, who loved him so much, yet were spiritually asleep when it mattered most. The disciples loved Jesus dearly, but they were asleep to the deeper reality of what God was doing through the cross. And so we're going to start this morning in Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. Just for some context, Jesus is with his disciples. And just moments before we jump into this verse, Peter has had what might be the shining moment of his entire discipleship journey. Because Jesus asks the group, he says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter, full of faith, full of fire, he declares, "You're the Messiah." He says, "You're the Son of the living God." It's bold, it's powerful, and Jesus praises him. He says, "Blessed are you, Simon. This was revealed to you by my Father in heaven." It's honestly probably Peter's greatest moment to date. I can just imagine him standing a little taller, shoulders back. He's like a star student. He's feeling excited. And then almost immediately, everything shifts. We pick up in Matthew chapter 16, verse 21, and it says, "From that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the 3rd day be raised to life." Now, this is the fun part. Peter took him aside, took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. He began to correct Jesus. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." One moment, Peter's having this star student experience, and the next thing Jesus is telling him, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Peter isn't trying to be malicious. Peter isn't trying to oppose Jesus. If anything, I think Peter thinks he's protecting Jesus. Peter loved Jesus dearly, but what Jesus is saying is, hey, Peter, you're asleep to what God's doing here. You're asleep to God's bigger plan. Peter still expected a Messiah who would conquer, not suffer. And so Peter wasn't rebelling against the mission. He was assuming he knew the method. Have you ever heard why we shouldn't assume? Everyone knows? Because it makes an ass out of you and me. I said it. This is what happened to Peter. He assumed he knew the plan. And how often do we do the same? How often do we cling to a version of Jesus that fits our expectations? We assume following Jesus means comfort, not sacrifice. We assume his love will protect us from pain, not lead us through it. We assume we want God to move, but only in ways that are familiar to us. We want victory, but we avoid surrender. Tim Keller once said, if your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshipping an idealized version of yourself. Peter had pictured the Messiah riding in power, overthrowing Rome and restoring Israel. And instead, Jesus is here talking about suffering, rejection, and death. Peter wasn't seeing Jesus as he was. He was seeing Jesus through the filter of his own hopes and his own desires. And I think so often we do the same. We assume Jesus came to fix the things that we would fix. He came to fight the enemies that we would fight. And he came to bless the paths that we would choose. And so I'd ask you this morning, where are you making assumptions about God right now? Because Peter couldn't imagine a cross in the story. But Jesus knew that without the cross, there was no crown. And without death, there was no resurrection. And I believe this morning that Good Friday is a call to us to wake up from our assumptions, to wake up from our expectations, and to wake up to the bigger story that God is writing. Nudge the person next to you, say, wake up. Wake up. Dig into those ribs. No. And so we continue on, and I want to fast forward now to Matthew chapter 26, where we find Jesus and his disciples at the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus knew what was about to come. This is the night before the big event. Jesus knew what was about to happen. It's late. The weight of what's about to happen is pressing. It's crushing, physically, spiritually. He knew what was to come, the betrayal, the mockery, the cross, the separation. And Jesus, fully man and fully God, he fully feels it. And in verse 38, he says to his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He takes his three closest friends, Peter, James, and John, and he asks them to simply stay close, stay awake, and keep watch. It says in verse 39, going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were so heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Jesus asks them to simply stay close and keep watch. And while Jesus is agonizing, they're asleep. physically and spiritually. 3 times, 3 invitations to stay present, and 3 moments that they miss. And Jesus comes back heartbreaking and says, couldn't you keep watch with me for even 1 hour? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Here's the thing, the disciples weren't lacking devotion. They were dulled by distraction. They didn't abandon Jesus, they just missed the moment. Not because they didn't love him, but because they didn't sense the urgency of what was actually happening. They were with Jesus, but not awake to what was happening. I don't know if you've ever been at a sporting match or a concert, and these incredible feats can be happening, just right in front of your eyes. And how many people are standing there with their phone out, trying to get the perfect angle, zooming in the perfect shot, trying to get the angle right. And in that moment, they're in the room, but they're about to miss the moment. It could be the winning goal of a grand final, and they're there trying to capture it through a phone, and when they could have actually been experiencing the moment with their own eyes. We live in a world where it's so easy to be present but unaware. You're physically there, but you're mentally checked out. Ever felt like that? How often do we grab our phones and just start mindlessly scrolling, totally oblivious to everything that's going on around us? And if we're not careful, we can do the exact same thing with Jesus. And so I'd ask you this morning, what are you distracted by? Is it comparison? Is it financial security? Is it entertainment? Because you can be near him and still miss what he's doing. You can love him and still sleep through something sacred. Good Friday is an invitation to us all to wake up from distraction and to wake up to his divine invitation. And the most important moments often arrive quietly and can pass unnoticed. And Jesus wasn't asking his disciples to solve everything. He wasn't asking them to preach or perform. He just said, stay awake with me. A.W. Tozer once said, complacency is a deadly foe of all spiritual growth. I think often the greatest threat to our faith isn't necessarily sin. It's spiritual sleep. Not a rejection of God, but a dulling of our sensitivity to him. When we allow spiritual drowsiness to take hold, we lose our urgency, we lose our awareness, we go from awake and alert to autopilot. And the disciples weren't spiritually dead, they were spiritually drowsy. They didn't lack depth, they lacked awareness. And so I'd ask you this morning, what moment are you sleeping through? What sacred invitation might be unfolding, but you're too distracted to see it? It might not be loud, it might not be glamorous, but maybe Jesus is quietly asking, will you stay awake with me? As we continue along in Matthew chapter 26, Jesus has been arrested. And verse 58 tells us that Peter, the disciple who was always first to speak, always first to act, and the first to pledge his loyalty to Jesus, who just hours earlier had said to Jesus, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. And Jesus, knowing the truth, replies, before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. And of course, Peter is confident. Never, he says, never. And yet, verse 58, we find Peter following at a distance. I think that tells us a lot. Jesus is on trial. Peter's in the courtyard by a fire, surrounded by strangers. And then this is where the questions start. In verse 69, it says, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard and a servant girl came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gateway and where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then he began to call down curses and he swore to them, I don't know the man. Immediately, the rooster crowed. I love that Luke's gospel adds this detail. It says in verse 61 of Luke 22, it says, at that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. A look. We've all been on the receiving end of a look. whether across a dining table, across a room. But can you imagine that moment? The look from the eyes of the one you love, but the one you've just denied. No words, just a look. And I wonder if in that moment, in that look, Peter sees it all. He sees his pride, he sees his fear, he sees his failure, he sees his humanity. And it says Peter went outside and he wept bitterly. That's what happens when we wake up to our need. When you realize that your love isn't enough, your willpower isn't enough, your strength isn't enough. You can be sincere and still fail. You can be close to Jesus and still fall. Peter wasn't rejecting his faith, but he was coming face to face with his weakness. We don't like admitting need. Our society teaches us from a very young age not to admit need. We're trained to push through, hold it together, keep the image polished. But the cross doesn't leave space for pretense. It exposes us and it invites us into something better than image. It invites us to honesty. And I think this morning that Good Friday offers us an opportunity to wake up from our own self-reliance and to wake up to our need for a savior. Peter swore he'd never leave Jesus. But when things got messy, he distanced himself. Peter believed that he was stronger than he was, and it wasn't until the pressure of the moment exposed his weakness. But here's the good news. Jesus went to the cross with Peter's denial in mind, and he still chose to die for him anyway. And the same is true for us. He knows the parts of you that you're ashamed of. He knows the fear. He sees the pride. He sees the distance. And still he says, I'm going to the cross for you. The cross wakes us up to our limits, to our brokenness, to our sin, and to our need for a savior. And so I'd ask you this morning, where have you been trying to prove that you're enough? Where have you, like Peter, been carrying guilt and shame, thinking that it puts you outside the reach of his grace? Where are you pretending to be strong when in reality you're so in need of that grace? I wonder this morning, where do you see yourself in Peter? Maybe you've been following Jesus at a distance. Maybe you've denied him, maybe with your words or maybe with your silence. Maybe you feel like your failure has disqualified you. Here's the good news. Jesus already knew, and he still went to the cross anyway. He didn't just die for the version of you that gets it right. He died for the version that falls asleep. He died for the version that denies, that walks away. That's the beauty of the cross, is you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to pretend. You just have to wake up. Good Friday offers us an opportunity to wake up from our self-reliance and to wake up to our need for a savior. The rooster crows, Peter weeps, the disciples scatter. It looks like failure. This is defeat. Jesus is whipped, beaten, and nailed to a cross. And we read in Matthew 27, verse 45, as Jesus hung on that cross, it says, "From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of their tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Jesus breathes his last breath. The earth shakes, the rocks split. The temple curtain, the thing that separated humanity from the holy presence of God, was torn from top to bottom. And the graves opened because even in that moment, death knew that it had been defeated. And then a Roman centurion, not a disciple, not a follower, not a friend, just a soldier standing near the cross, sees everything happen and he says, surely he was the Son of God. He wasn't waiting for a Messiah. He wasn't raised in the scriptures. He was part of the execution team. But something in the way Jesus died, something in the way he forgave, something in the way he suffered, the way the whole world seemed to stop for him, it woke that centurion up. I wonder, have you ever had that moment when suddenly you saw something for what it really was? You thought it was ordinary until it wasn't. You thought it was routine until you saw the beauty of it. You thought you knew the story until you felt it. That's what the cross does. The most brutal moment in history was also the most beautiful. Because in that moment, Jesus didn't just die. He tore open the barrier between God and man. The curtain didn't just rip, an invitation was extended. And we're invited, wake up from your familiarity and wake up to the wonder of the cross. This is the moment where we stop analyzing, we stop explaining. That's hard for some of us to do. And we just stand in awe. Because the wonder isn't that Jesus died. The wonder is why he died. He did it for us. He could have saved himself. He could have called down angels. He could have walked away. But instead he stayed. He suffered. He surrendered. And when he said it is finished on that cross, it wasn't a sigh of grief. It wasn't a sigh of defeat. It was a declaration of victory. And I wonder this morning, what if we've heard this story so many times that we've stopped being moved by it? What if we've grown so familiar that we've forgotten how holy it is? Maybe this morning we need to pray, Lord, help me see again. Wake me up to the wonder of the cross. You know, Good Friday, it's not about trying harder, being good enough. It's not about a religious performance. It's about this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He went to the cross fully awake. The question this morning for all of us is, are we awake to him? The Easter story, it invites us to wake up. Wake up from your assumptions. Wake up from your distractions. Wake up from your self-reliance. And wake up to the wonder. Are you awake this morning? Or has it become familiar, ordinary, distant? The same Jesus who hung on that cross, who tore the veil, is still today calling people to wake up. He still extends the invitation to us today. Would you wake up? Through Jesus' death, the barrier between us and God was removed, access was granted, intimacy was restored, grace was released. Maybe you've heard the story 1,000 times, but this morning, would you let the wonder in again?
Thanks for spending time with us today. To hang out again the next time an episode drops, make sure you subscribe. See ya!